Hey fellow gamers, Chris here with the Dargon Gaming Squad. I just received my copy of Genesys role-playing system and a set of the Genesys dice. So grab a drink, grab a snack, pull up a chair, and let's flip through this book and check out these dice together. I've made no secret of the fact that I am in love with the narrative dice system of the Star Wars Fantasy Flight games. And I've been playing Edge of the Empire now since last summer. I was first introduced to it by Sam at Chalice and Chains, and I've been playing with him ever since. If you want to check out a video about that system specifically, I'll make sure to link it below. Sam and I had a really great conversation about it and what made it different from other systems that you may be familiar with, like D&D. And I've also played, like I said, in several sessions, so you can find that in a playlist on our channel of games that we've played in. So check that out if that's of interest to you. So how that correlates to this is, if you've ever thought, man, I really like that narrative dice system, but I'd really like to play it in a fantasy setting, or I'd really like to play it in space opera or Western, that's what Genesys is all about. So this is that system set up to play in other settings, and there's actually 6 different settings in here, well, example settings that you can use to create your own, and a really good GM toolkit. So right off the bat, there's the lovely artwork. It's a sort of a fantasy setting castle, but then there's an airship up in this corner and some sort of flying vehicle in this corner, and that kind of speaks to the steampunk, the futuristic, everything. And there's even some like machinery up here, so it kind of gives you a really good peek at the variety of things you can do with the system. So I also did go ahead and pick up the Genesys dice. I picked up just one set. You can run this with just your Star Wars dice instead. The symbols are slightly different, but they mean the same things. And then the only thing that you'll notice that's different is two things are different. You don't get any tokens with this for light side and dark side points. You also don't get the destiny die that determines how many light or dark points you have. And that's because in this system they have story points instead. I haven't read about that yet. I don't exactly know how it works yet, but I do know that that exists, and that's the thing. So guys, let's dig into this book and see what's going on inside. All right, guys, so here we go. Let's just see. So there's our intro, table of contents. The table of contents, actually, let me zoom in a little bit. So it appears to be pretty well laid out. It looks like it starts with the core mechanics, moves on to character creation, which I always appreciate when that's early on in a book. As a player, somebody who primarily plays and doesn't run so often, it's always nice to be able to get right in there and get to the meat of what you need. Skills are listed next, and then talents and equipment. So far it's laid out a lot like, pretty much just like the Edge of the Empire book. I'm not really surprised by that at all. It moves on to combat encounters, social encounters, the game master, and then it introduces the 6 settings so that part 1 was the rules and part 2 was the settings. Part 3 is Game Master's Toolkit, and that has a section on customizing rules, alternate rules, build an adventure, tones, and I guess that's it. And then we move right into the introduction. So there's some artwork that's kind of more line art, sketch, draft type. Looks like the headings are all really logical. Here's a good explanation, or what looks to be a good explanation without reading it, but just at a glance, of the dice breakdown and how they work and what the results mean. some modern kind of futuristic looking stuff. Here's some information on difficulty levels. I'm not gonna try to flip through every single page, but I do want to kind of get a feel for how this book is laid out. So here's a character archetype, a couple of them, an average human, an aristocrat, an intellectual, a laborer. They talk about the careers, examples of fears and strengths. I do know that one thing that's also different about this game from listening to the podcast is it's not so much obligations as it is motivations. So you pick desires, fear, strengths, and flaws for your character. And that reminded me a little bit of the backgrounds out of 5th edition. So here's some social skills stuff, general skills. Here's some of the abilities: skullduggery, stealth, streetwise. So these are survival, vigilance. These are all very familiar from Star Wars. Knowledge skills, combat skills, melee, ranged, heavy, different. Magic. There's magic. That should be interesting. Here's a bunch of stuff on talents, or a section on the different talents. It explains the tiers, which is something I'm not real familiar with. I haven't started assigning any talents to my character yet, but encumbrance, item qualities, item maintenance, skip ahead a little, maneuvers, incidentals, flying, actions, environmental effects. So far a lot of the artwork's been this more sketched out, almost draft, or kind of reminds me of like CAD drawing. Pretty interesting. Here's something on structuring social encounters, prep tips, game master resources. Oh, there's a dragon. Adversary profiles. Here's a character sheet. Looks like. Oh, actually it's a setting worksheet, it says. As we said before, our example settings aren't complete settings. Uh-oh. I was worried about that. Maybe I should have held off. Anyway, instead, we intend for them to be frameworks you can use to build your own settings for your own games. Oh, cool. All right, so hopefully I'll be able to use this worksheet. I hope I can find like a form-fillable PDF version of it. So maybe there's some, I'll take a look at the Fantasy Flight website and see if there's some free PDFs of any of this stuff. So here's some example setting stuff, starting character options, setting specific gear. Here's some charts and stuff. Looks pretty useful, we'll see. Here's something on steampunk, a section about that, and an example setting, and again, gear. So it looks like, you know, they have kind of some themes and some things. They've got some tables to help you out. Adversaries, Weird War. That reminds me of the Weird West. This might be another way to do Weird West or Western straight up, depending on what you're in the mood for. Here's something about example setting androids. So that must be for more of the space opera. Here's an example setting for Twilight Imperium. I understand that's a really popular board game. Here's the Game Master's Toolkit. So, customizing rules, create a species or archetype. Oh, that's going to come in really handy for this urban fantasy idea I have. Here's how to create talents, Items. Oh, again, really handy. There's an item I have in mind already for that game. One of my favorite book series is The Hollows by Kim Harrison, and I know there's a few people in the Absolute Tabletop book group who have read that series besides me. So if you've ever read that series, there's some really cool stuff in it, and I definitely will be heavily influenced by that and a couple other of my favorite book series. So here's stuff for Magic rules. I think that's one of the best things about this podcast that Sam turned me on to. Again, that's the Dice Pool podcast. Is they've done a whole series of podcasts on the game itself, some of the rudimentary stuff, and also about ways to use their narrative dice, how that works, including an example play, which was really great. Anyway, here's vehicle rules, planetary scale versus personal scale, vehicle combat. That could be really handy for somebody who's doing space stuff. Here's some stuff about hacking. That's something I'll probably incorporate in my urban fantasy game, so that might be handy. And then talking about building an adventure, constructing encounters, and then tones. And I imagine that's things like, oh, see here, like here's horror. You could probably do just about anything. Intrigue. This book doesn't want to lay flat yet, so I'm trying to be gentle with it. Mystery, pulp. Pulp would be really fun. Romance and drama. Superheroes. I've heard some talk of people wanting to do something superhero. And then here's the index. And here's a character sheet. Here's a talent pyramid. That's interesting. I don't recall seeing any talent trees inside the book. And then it looks like these are kind of images giving you examples of what the settings, images that kind of go with the settings inside. So I want to give you an overview of the dice, and then we'll take a closer look and compare them to the Star Wars dice. So there are 6 different dice that come in the dice set, and then you have multiples of those dice. So you have positive and negative dice in this game. The positive dice represent your character, and the negative dice represent your enemies or environmental situations, challenges that the GM may see fit to throw at you. So let's go ahead and take an even closer look at the dice. Let's compare them to the Star Wars dice. Since you can use either or, and you may already have Star Wars dice in your collection, I'm hoping that this will be valuable to you to see how the symbols are different, although they represent the same things. So let's take a look. All right, guys, so right here I have the new Genesys dice, and over here I have the Star Wars dice. So right away, the first thing I notice is that the color is different. This one's not as bright green. The next thing I notice is, of course, the symbols are a little bit different. This facing right now is a success. This one looks a little more like a sunshine. I assume that the symbols are essentially the same. I guess I'm going to open the book real quick so I can make sure that I know what I'm talking about with this Genesys dice. This triangle down here is an advantage, as is this in Star Wars. So those are different. So you could have any combination there. So there's 2 successes. Here's the 2 successes on the Star Wars. Okay. You can have multiple, you can have the advantages, of course, and you can have, there should be one with multiple advantages. There we go. Okay. You might also see blanks. So like right here is a blank, and there's the corresponding blank. This is your proficiency dice. These also, same thing, we have, the symbols slightly different. So now on this one, it's just interesting because now the Genesys die is a little bit brighter than the Star Wars die. These are the only ones that you can have a triumph. So let's see, this is what the triumph looks like on Star Wars. And this is our Triumph in Genesys. So this is a little confusing because I want to show you this on this red die. Look how similar those are. So if you're playing with your Star Wars die and your Genesys die, which is my intention, I have 2 sets of Star Wars and I only ordered 1 more in the Genesys. Those are awful similar. So this is a threat. So that's a little confusing, and you better know your symbols really well if you're going to mix those dice. So anyway, I'll come back to that one in a minute. And then we have the boost die. And again, I'm noticing the colors are just slightly different. So we've got a brighter blue for this time for Genesys and a paler blue for Star Wars. There's our successes again. Same idea. These symbols are going to be pretty much, well, they are going to be exactly the same as they are in the other sets. Alright, so let's move on to the challenge die. That's always going to be the red. Now, in the Genesys die, right there, the Genesys one is more of a burgundy red or a crimson red, and this is more of a red, just a red. So this is a despair, and this is the despair. Actually, those are not so dissimilar. I think I can keep those straight, but those are the despair. Failures. Now this is really different. So we have X's in Genesys, and we have these triangles that are a little rounded off. This die is just slightly smaller, I think, too. And I felt the same about the yellow proficiency die. So this is a threat symbol. And again, the threat symbol for Star Wars is this. So, okay. So it's going to be the same idea, right? We have X's for failures instead of these triangles, and you know, this is a threat. These are threats. And then I think that's it for the purple die. And again, the colors are really different. This one's a little bit darker. This is a more of a grape purple, and this is more of an eggplant or a royal type purple. And then last but not least, we have the setback die. And again, failures, threats, and these have a blank. So the black look pretty much exact. I mean, I'm not seeing any discernible difference really in the color. The shape does seem a little different. These seem a little narrower, but that could just be my eyes tricking me. I guess they're the same. So anyway, that's your comparison there of Genesys dice versus Star Wars dice. Alright, so I think that wraps up my first impressions video of the Genesys Core Rulebook and dice. I hope you found it useful and informative. We'd like to know if you're playing this game. Have you picked this book up yet, or are you, adapting something using the toolkit to create your own setting? Really like to know how that's going for you, and maybe we can even hook up and do a collab video about that. So if you're new to the channel, thank you so much for stopping by, and we really hope you'll hit that subscribe button so that you can catch all of our videos. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it the thumbs up. And for those who are returning, thank you so much for your support. We really appreciate it. And until next time, get out and get gaming.